you very much, Priscilla Finley. Shakespeare and environmental crisis. I've just got shots of a few news clips I gathered over several days earlier this month. The news is certainly increasing, environmental news, but it's a long way from giving the topic its due. Of course, much of that news consists of scientific reports that come out, and usually scientific reports are just, page 15, low priority unless there's an asteroid about to hit the Earth. This one, and these are just really, I'm sorry, these aren't bigger. These are just sort of markers for the news story, and this is just the hottest record ever recorded, July and August, and apparently September was on track again for the highest monthly temperature ever recorded. Bang, okay. This one, oceans at limit. This study finds oceans are absorbing the great majority of the excess heat produced by greenhouse gases, and that is affecting the ocean for the worse, and will affect it much more for the worst. Pushed to their absolute limit, one's report. The ocean, of course, is also absorbing a lot of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, with huge consequences on shellfish and coral reefs, and not to mention overfishing. And the last one, on the downside, wilderness areas of the planet are rapidly being reduced to tiny remnants. There's a wonderful, horrifying stat on this. They calculated the total mass of all of the 30,000 species of land vertebrates. And 32% of that flesh, that mass, is taken up by one species. I don't have to tell you which one. Another 65% belongs to the special animals kept by that species. Cows, sheep, pigs, dogs, cats. That leaves 3% for all the other 30,000 vertebrates, all the wild creatures in the world. These stats come from 2003, and I'm sure the percentage of wild creatures has not gone up. It's probably going down. It's not hard to see that we haven't gotten a handle on our environmental problems. On climate change, scientists originally called for greenhouse gas emissions worldwide to peak and start dropping by now. But of course they haven't. Pressured by politicians and bureaucrats, official scientific reports have been deferring the date by which greenhouse gas emissions worldwide must start dropping to prevent climate chaos. And to compensate for that, they keep increasing the rate at which emissions must drop after that date. But the only method of achieving such rapid reduction that is being considered involves unproven and grossly underfunded carbon capture technology that observers characterize as a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. Leaders have emphatically not come together on crash programs to develop renewables, nor to question the values of the globalization juggernaut. At this point, says the head of the German Security Institute, limiting temperature rise to that official benchmark of 2 degrees centigrade, quote, is scientific nonsense, unquote. Climate scientists Kevin Anderson and Alice Bowes of Britain's Tyndall Center for Climate Research have denounced the entire international climate negotiation process as 2 decades of bluffs and lies. Our own James Hansen, perhaps the most famous climate scientist, called the Paris Climate Summit of last December a fraud. As for top climate economists, Michael Grubb, editor of the journal Climate Policy, declares that the international negotiation process inhabits a world divorced from realities. After reviewing the low scores of the United States in fulfilling the UN's Sustainability Development Goals, Jeffrey Sachs, the eminent Columbia University economist and UN advisor, remarked, "This basic question, can the world economy grow and not destroy the planet, is still a question." Arguably the single most respected climate scientist, Lord Nicholas Stern, remarked at the Paris conference last December, perhaps with a touch of impatience, "I'm very optimistic about what we can do. That's not the same as saying I'm optimistic about what we will do." These are establishment economists, mainstream economists, who for decades have defined sustainability as a combination of protecting the environment while vigorously pursuing economic growth through capitalist globalization. But even they are starting to sweat bullets, though they are still not talking about modifying their approach. So especially given that the UN's current estimate for annual climate change-related deaths today is already 400,000 and rising, it is fairly certain that there will be comparatively awful things to come. Some joker might rewrite that song, The 12 Days of Christmas, to enumerate various environmental horrors, perhaps ending each verse with the lines, "My true love gave to me a jellyfish in a pear tree." But the great work of the future will be avoiding the kind of climate chaos that will make advanced society impossible and threaten to render even the wonders of Hamlet or King Lear irrelevant. Otherwise, to take a literary character inspired by Shakespearean protagonists, we would be emulating the deliberate choice of Milton's Satan to corrupt humans and thereby enter, quote, "a still deeper hell than the one created for his initial punishment." But today, most people aren't even aware of the dire situation. Some deny it, of course, and a lot of those who are more or less aware are trying not to think about it. To quote the psychologist George Marshall, author of the book Don't Even Think About It, "The inescapable failure of a society built upon growth and its destruction of the Earth's living systems is the overwhelming fact of our existence. As a result, it is mentioned almost nowhere. It is the 21st century's great taboo, the subject guaranteed to alienate your friends and neighbors. I do apologize for any alienation effect I might be causing here." Let's now briefly check out 3 more screenshots of heartening recent news concerning ongoing efforts to address environmental crises. Here, Britain's, oh yeah, there it is. Britain's Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is proposing hundreds of community-based renewable energy cooperatives to replace the corporate fossil fuel grid. Germany is a model here where many cities and towns have taken local control of their energy supply and already switched to solar and wind. But here in Nevada, with all of our sun power, we have a foot-dragging, fossil fuel-loving, officially legalized for-profit energy monopoly. Why can't we be more like Dusseldorf? With their bodies, hello, well, we got 3. With their bodies, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe continues to resist the Dakota-accessed oil pipeline. Native Americans from all over the United States and Canada have joined them. And here you see, no, that's okay, that's jumping one ahead. Yeah, there it is. There's really not much to see there anyway. You don't see rallies, but they have been organized in cities around the country. For the local tribes, the focus is not primarily on climate change. It is on tribal sovereignty, desecration of burial grounds, and the risk of water table pollution. But this case shows how local issues can feed into the struggle against the climate chaos that fossil fuels are bringing, and that connection has given momentum to the rallies that are referenced here in the headlines in various cities around the country. The case illustrates how environmental struggle means struggle for environmental justice or climate justice. Okay, thank you. This is the last one. Finally, children here and abroad are pursuing many lawsuits under the public trust doctrine against governments whose environmental negligence will impede their constitutionally protected right to the pursuit of happiness. They are seeking environmental justice, that they too have a fair say in environmental decisions, and that environmental benefits and environmental burdens will be fairly distributed to them too. The federal government, in league with oil corporations, I might add, which is disgusting but not surprising, tried to get the case dismissed, but they lost, and will try again in federal district court. But last year in Holland, a similar case was actually won by child plaintiffs. The judge ordered compensation, and the Dutch government is now appealing. If the children win and legal precedents are set in these cases, the positive impact could be enormous. It may well be at this point that grassroots mobilization on a scale rarely seen is absolutely necessary to avoid climate chaos. As Naomi Klein argues in her splendid book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. Klein's book often chimes with another one that is sort of a renegade throwback to medieval economic ideas like just price and protection of shared commons, a book written by the Pope who took the name of a tree-hugging medieval saint, Francis, and last year published that scandalous environmental study encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. Both Klein and Pope Francis emphasize that environmental issues are inevitably issues of ethics and justice. And Francis also urges citizens to become involved in local decisions affecting the environment. Okay, so how about another antediluvian figure, William Shakespeare? For the grassroots, of course, includes readers, teachers, and scholars of English literature. And the fifth of the 5 official learning outcomes at UNLV, what students are supposed to get out of it all, is citizenship and ethics, which includes, quote, the concept of sustainability as it impacts economic, environmental, and social concerns. There was a good deal of bad weather in Shakespeare's time. It was the middle of the so-called Little Ice Age, which historian Jeffrey Parker connects to the so-called general crisis of 17th century Europe and Asia, when famine, war, rebellion, homelessness, and disease increased. Shakespeare uses the theme of severe weather often. Severity has to be endured, and it requires resilience. In the sonnets, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, but the beloved's beauty is an eternal summer that won't fade, though only because the poet is writing about him. In Twelfth Night, perseverance and fortune lead to an amazing, almost entirely happy ending, even though the fact of life is that, symbolically at least, the rain, it raineth every day, as Vesta's song assures. Severe weather in England led to failed harvests, hunger, and homelessness. The worst weather of the 16th century came in the 1590s, and in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the fairy queen Titania attributes that weather to her spat with King Oberon because of the natural sympathy between them and the moon, which controls floods. Parker found that many people during the general crisis, from China to France, remarked on the unprecedented severity of storms they experienced, as do characters in Macbeth and King Lear. In the latter, Kent says, "Since I was a man, such sheets of fire, such bursts of hard thunder, such groans of warring wind and rain I ne'er remember to have heard. Man's nature cannot carry the affliction nor the force." The storm scene in Lear is among the most meaningful from the perspective of the environmental crisis modern society has created, which has already afflicted so many men, women, animals, and ecosystems beyond carrying. Lear's cruel daughters and his own stubbornness have led to his exposure to the elements. He exhorts the storm to do its worst, to flood the land to the tops of the steeples with their rooster weather vanes. Spout till you have drenched the steeples, drowned the cocks. With its oak-cleaving thunderbolts, this scene underscores the feebleness of living things compared to the power of the elements. And in that way, it's suggestive of both early modern and our own current condition of living in meteorological and ecological uncertainty. So it is not surprising that at one point, Lear's subjective experience of the storm actually lends it an apocalyptic power. He exhorts it to strike flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's molds, all Germans spill at once that makes ingrateful man. Ingrateful man. One reading of those lines finds Lear wishing the storm would render everyone on this round earth sterile by virtue of their ingratitude, ending human life. Extinction is not an impossible outcome of the present crisis, and is not the environmental crisis a mark of one species in colossal ingratitude to the rest of nature. Lear soon focuses, however, on the storm's ability to punish his ungrateful daughters. It is young Edgar, disguised as a beggar for most of that play, who, along with steadfast Cordelia, exhibits the flexibility and proactive resourcefulness that defeats the forces of evil in the play, resourcefulness that we may need evermore in the future. Scholars give the rather awkward name organicism to traditional habits of thought regarding the natural world in Shakespeare's time, as opposed to mechanistic ideas that gradually took hold with the rise of modern science. In many ways, organicism resembles environmentalist thinking today. Shakespeare's staging of traditional attitudes may provide a constructive perspective for approaching today's environmental crises. Excuse me a second. Gotta love those kids, huh? One of them is James Had's daughter, the climate scientist. The granddaughter, rather. For 16th century Europeans, says environmental historian Carolyn Merchant, the root metaphor binding together self, society, and the cosmos was that of an organism. As a projection of the way people experienced daily life, organismic theory emphasized interdependence, subordination of individual to communal purposes in family, community, and state, and a vital life permeating the cosmos to the lowest stone. It's all alive. Central to the organic theory was the identification of nature, especially the earth, with a nurturing grandmother, a kindly, beneficent female who provided for the needs of mankind in an ordered, planned universe. But another opposing image of nature as female was also prevalent, wild and uncontrollable nature that could render violence, storms, droughts, and general chaos. With regard to animals, this orientation de-emphasized their difference from humans. Humans participated in animal nature and shared the same bodily materials with them. What Laurie Shannon calls human negative exceptionalism was also in evidence, thinking of human nature as in various ways inferior to the particular natures of different animals. When King Lear compulsively removes his clothes, for instance, having gained insight into himself, though not having gained full sanity, he discovers that man is just a poor, bare, forked animal, the animal not equipped with a natural coat to protect itself. Though I'm simplifying what was complex, the modern view was more dualistic in all these respects. The matter of the universe is not alive, but dead. The cosmos works like a machine, not an organism. Human beings are superior to and essentially different from all other life forms, and communities and states should foster free, acquisitive individuals. As You Like It emphasizes and imaginatively extends the traditional view with respect not only to the relationship between humans and animals, but also to a vision of ecocentric politics that includes the natural world. The play's main location is the Forest of Arden, where Rosalind, disguised as an adolescent male Ganymede, participates in a highly unconventional courtship ritual with Orlando, who enjoys pretending that he is in the company of the actual Rosalind, whom he hardly knows, but is flagrantly idealized. Orlando, therefore, requires instruction, and Rosalind delivers it by deflating his fantasies with beastly comparisons that hilariously confuse both animal and human with Orlando's Petrarchan idealizations of love. Beastly comparisons that have hilariously confused both animal and human, confusing animal and human, and also confuse Orlando's Petrarchan idealizations of love with Ganymede's discourse of beastly affection. Ganymede's Rosalind, in her holiday humor, ready for wooing, presents the married condition as a carnivalized chain of being that joins mad beasts, joins Orlando, the cuckold-destined snail hen, he's likened to both a snail and a hen, with his beloved androgynous cock, pigeon, parrot, ape, monkey, hyena. That's all the ways that Rosalind describes herself. Rosalind declares, for instance, that she will be more jealous of thee than a Barbary cock pigeon over his hen, more clamorous than a parrot against rain, more newfangled than an ape, more giddy in my desires than a monkey. I will weep for nothing, like Diana at the fountain. In other words, I'll weep over nothing. And when you are disposed to be merry, I will laugh like a hyena, and that when thou art inclined to sleep. If Ganymede's Rosalind thinks Orlando good, she will have 20 such, and she approves the snail as a wooer because he comes with a house and brings his destiny with him, horns, the horns of snails, thereby arriving armed with his fortune to forestall the slander of his wife. He'll cover it up. Pretend it's his kid. Rosalind, which is what a good husband should do, right? Rosalind's festive discourse discloses and celebrates a fundamental human creatureliness that chimes with traditional attitudes towards the human in relation to the natural world. The Forest of Arden, and As You Like It, is sort of a republic of nature, one that addresses contemporary thought, such as Giordano Bruno's, and positive representations of political republicanism itself, that is, not being ruled by a monarch. It also recalls statements of sympathy for the sufferings of animals and representations of less rank or class-ordered societies. In an ecological polity, a republic of nature, all aspects cooperate for mutual benefit. The natural commons is not fenced off with enclosures, as England was at the time, forcing people to migrate, often to forests, as common lands were enclosed by landlords and the farmers were thrown off the land. The character Jacques questions the practice of hunting deer. For him, it is the anthropocentric qualities of animals, most evident in the deer's tears, that provide the basis for ecocentric musings that begin to recognize an independent ethical claim of nature. Discerning those qualities are enabled by the topsy-turvy discourse of festivity, which already implies them by understanding the human in terms of the animal. And for Duke Senior, who doesn't have his dukedom anymore, Arden is not a place for hierarchy, but for co-mates and brothers. Hamlet takes the affinity between human and beast one step further in his, that is the character's, leveling discourse that puts worm above king. After accidentally murdering Polonius, we're not interested in that, He responds to King Claudius's demand to know the whereabouts of the body this way. At supper, a certain convocation of politic worms are eaten at him. We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. Your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service. A man may fish with the worm that hath ate of a king. Later, Hamlet muses on the recycling process by which human becomes humus, and conquering hero becomes a beer keg plug. Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth to the dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam whereto he was converted might they not stop a beer barrel? Such wise musings seem to have been part of the change Hamlet undergoes in Act 5 that finally allows him to carry out his appointed task. My last point here is to celebrate the promising thoughts of a particular climate scientist who seems to have recognized that ancient and early modern attitudes can constructively address the environmental crisis. This is Kevin Anderson. I mentioned him before, of the Tyndall Climate Research Center, along with his fellow climate scientist Alice Bowes. They've been studying the fate of scientific findings at the hands of various stakeholders tasked to devise policies to mitigate climate change. As early as 2013, Professor Anderson lost confidence in the political and economic hegemony, as he put it. His blog declares that, this is terrific, we need a paradigm shift on the level of Newton, Darwin, Einstein, and Planck. We need to travel back to the Greek framing of economics as oikonomia, Bordley, stewardship of the household, he glosses. Then 2 degrees centigrade becomes more economically viable, he says, but stick with a narrow neoclassical crematistic framing of efficiency, or more properly, financial efficiency, and 2 degrees centigrade is a non-starter. Oikonomia, classical Greek source of our word economy, refers to the proper management of a household, or oikos. Anderson refers to proper management of our common home, the earth, and its biosphere, which requires limiting anthropogenic temperature rise no more than 2 degrees centigrade. By crematistics, Greeks meant, sometimes disparagingly, of or pertaining to or engaged in the acquisition of wealth, or the art of dealing with money. Here, Anderson means specifically economists' and politicians' strategy of pricing carbon through cap and trade schemes, but more generally, making profitability the prerequisite for going green, deploying, he says elsewhere, the rhetoric of green growth that increasingly dominates the climate agenda. The crematistic strategy, he's saying, has been a failure. Indeed, it has. Focusing on money rather than directly on limiting emissions to salvage the well-being of the inhabitants of our common home. Well-being is not the goal of crematistics, as studies revealing the disjunction between income and happiness show. Well-being demands the wisdom, moral sensitivity, and careful husbandry belonging to oikonomia. What does this have to do with early modern England? That period was something of a battleground between the economic and ethical orientations of oikonomia and crematistics. And I'm indebted to a book that Professor Gajowski edited on this. Crematistics eventually won and became modern economics, despite the fact that the word oikonomia is the word source. It's not the meaning source of our word economics. That's crematistics, wealth. Well before that works, but well before that, works as different as Ben Jonson's of Penshurst and Thomas More's Utopia, with its critique of money and greed, expressed the traditional oikonomic orientation. Xenophon's ancient, widely translated Oikonomicus, they pronounce it the same way, I think, they just started with an O. Economicus stressed the importance of agricultural husbandry as part of household management, the principles of which it extended to society and statecraft as well. A good ruler is a good husbander, you see, which seek well-being and the common good, and which certainly does not require 67 people owning the wealth of 3.5 billion as obtains today. Did you see that statistic? Yes, and it's going down, of course. It's expected to be 20 people by 2020 who own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people on the planet, half of the world's people. And despite the consuming interest economic critics of Shakespeare today have in market relations, Charlotte Scott has recently maintained that, quote, this is my end, Shakespeare's plays and poems situate husbandry in all those senses at the forefront of their social and moral economies. Okay, that's it. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions if anybody has any or comments. Yes.
Thank you, Charles. David Hawkes doesn't do this in his book, Shakespeare and Economic Theory, but do you think, he just goes back to the Greeks, but do you think the problem goes back to Genesis 1, man shall have dominion over all, and how that word dominion is translated from the Hebrew?
Yeah,
does it mean
that's a big question.
Caretaking? Does it mean power over?
Well, yeah, but yes, it depends on how you interpret it. In context, the Bible says, it shows a certain respect for animals in the Bible. The covenant with Noah is also a covenant with all the animals, for instance. But if you're asking me I don't know. There are many plausible reasons why we're in the situation we're in, but none of them are convincing to me because of the stakes, it's like, it's just not proportional. Yes?
I had a question, and when you were talking about the more contemporary crises, and you mentioned that with all of the resources that the Southwest has as far as solar and renewable energy, but that none of that is being really used, well, to a point anyway. I mean, there's a solar place out at
Sure, yeah.
On a small scale.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what kinds of things can I, as just a regular citizen, do to help move that forward, other than voting, which is kind of an obvious?
Yeah. Well, one thing you can do is go to the Public Utility Commission meetings. Go early because they can be crowded. There's one on Monday, in fact. I think I'll be there. I'm going to hit them with the lawsuit thing. They could be sued.
By the children?
Yeah, last time I deposited the Earth statement there, I put them on notice. This is what needs to be done. So, they're in jeopardy. Just kidding. Probably not. But yeah, apparently there was an agreement. We have a for-profit monopoly. That's our utility company, and it would be very hard to change that. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that there was a period of drought, climactic chaos.
How's this? You mentioned earlier that there was a period of climactic chaos in the late 15th century into the 16th.
Yeah, the little ice age. Yeah,
the little ice age. Has any other evidence you've uncovered of that being perhaps part of a natural cycle that the Earth may have?
Sure. Oh, a cycle. I don't know.
Because we've pretty much been only recording the weather for about the last century and a half or so. Consistently.
Yeah. I've read that it had to do with the reversal of two ocean currents, one over Iceland and one over the Azores.
Right.
And they just flipped. This happens.
Yeah.
Jet streams will flip.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not, you know, just have to wait and see. It's probably not recurrent.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
The discovery of the New World in the reports Montaigne and so on is talking about the wilderness, the plenty, the fertility of the New World. How did that figure, or was there any figuring in Shakespeare's thought about resources and nature and the wilderness?
I do know that there aren't really many references in Shakespeare to the New World. And I don't think I can really answer that. When certainly those resources were used, there was extremely unequal ecological exchange, you might say, between the New World and Europe, which enabled the takeoff of Europe. And of course, with the population collapse, extermination of Native Americans in some cases through disease as well as slavery, what have you. A lot of trees grew back, and this is a theory. You know, that because there was a phenomenon that they find in the ice cores, the Orbis spike, it's called 1610, when the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere plummeted. Well, not plummeted, but they hit a low point. And this was apparently because there was so much vegetation in the New World over what had used to be agricultural land that was no longer tilled because there was nobody to till it, that caused the carbon dioxide level to drop because the plants were using it up. But that's questioned now, and I think they need to do more research.
Gabriel Egan in Green Shakespeare's from a decade ago, I guess that's the book that kind of ushered in eco-criticism in Shakespeare studies and early modern studies.
It would have happened anyway.
Pardon?
Would have happened anyway.
Right, yeah. In that book, he makes the point that he's going against the grain, in that he's not defending Tilliard and the great chain of being, but he points out that at least back in the Elizabethan and the Jacobean era, that people under the common populace understood, as well as the educated populace, that everything on earth was connected, and that's the grounds on which Gabriel Egan goes back and kind of revivifies, reanimates the great chain of being. Do you think that kind of understanding, that is not going backwards instead of forwards, but do you think that kind of understanding that everything is connected? Well, I guess I'm asking, would you agree with Gabriel Egan's premise that it's helpful for us today confronting our contemporary crisis to understand those prior theoretical frameworks? I
just think, you know, he's asking for it with that framing of it. Look at Carolyn Merchant's framing, which I quoted. She's emphasizing another side of it. And these are, you know, you could call them ideologies. They can be used in different ways. So no, I wouldn't, great chain of being, no. I think it's a strategic thing. I think it is in there, you know. They didn't have all the answers by any means back then, of course. Anyone else?
Thank you so much for your talk today, Professor Whitney.
You're very welcome.
Ken, the first folio is open for viewing.